A few months ago, I decided to explore a hiking trail I had never taken before. I had heard about it from a few locals, who described it as a path that led to an old cave deep in the woods. It was supposed to be a hidden spot, a place where people could go to get away from everything. I was looking for something different, something off the beaten path, so I packed my gear and set out alone. The trail was rough, overgrown with thick brush and hidden roots that threatened to trip me up at every step. I could tell it wasn't frequently hiked, and the deeper I went, the quieter it became. No birds, no wind, just the sound of my own footsteps. I found the entrance to the cave without much trouble. It was narrow, but wide enough to step inside. When I entered, I felt a sudden drop in temperature, but the air was damp, and the silence inside was heavier than outside. I moved deeper, my flashlight casting long shadows that seemed to dance across the walls. I was beginning to feel a bit uneasy, but I told myself it was just my imagination. Then, I heard it, a faint shuffling sound behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The cave was empty, silent once again. I let out a shaky breath, trying to convince myself that it was just the echo of my own movements. But as I turned to head back, I felt the hairs on my neck stand on end. I was being watched, and I knew it. The shuffling came again, this time closer. I took a step toward the entrance, but my flashlight flickered and died. In the dark, I strained to hear anything that would tell me I wasn't alone. The whisper came next, soft and barely audible, like a voice from far away, saying, "Shh, shh." I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I bolted, stumbling over rocks and roots, the sound of footsteps following me, but never catching up. I reached the trail and kept running until I found my way back to the main road. The sun had set, and the quiet of the forest now felt more oppressive than ever. I didn't go back to that cave for weeks, but the sound of that voice kept me up at night. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, that the echo had spooked me into hearing things, but the memory of the whisper grew louder, until I felt I had no choice but to return and face it. The next day, I packed my gear again, determined to find out what had happened. The trail was just as I had left it, hidden by thick trees and tangled roots. I followed it, expecting to find the cave, but when I arrived at the spot, it was gone. The earth was solid, a wall of dirt and vegetation that had grown over it. Confused and frustrated, I turned to leave when I heard it again, that shuffling sound. I took a step back, my breath quickening as I turned my flashlight toward the sound. The beam landed on a pair of eyes, glistening and wide, staring at me from behind a tree. I froze, unable to move or speak. The eyes shifted, and a figure stepped forward. It was emaciated, pale, with long, bony limbs that moved in jerky motions. The same whisper from before returned, closer now, but this time I could make out the words, "You shouldn't have come back." I turned and ran, the branches scraping at my face and arms, the footsteps right behind me. This time, the path back was clear, and I didn't stop until I reached my car. The forest was silent, as if nothing had happened, but I knew better. I never went back to those woods again. I don't know what I saw, who, or what was in that cave, but whatever it was, it didn't want me there. The whispers stayed with me, a constant reminder that some places are better left alone. And whatever had watched me that night, it had made sure I knew it would always be waiting, just beyond the edge of the forest. It started as a simple weekend getaway, I was looking for a break from the noise of the city, so I decided to explore an old hiking trail I had heard about from a friend. He mentioned it led to a cave that was said to be haunted, but dismissed it as just a story to scare people. I thought it would be the perfect way to spend a day disconnected from everything. The trail was narrow and twisted, barely visible through the dense trees. It had a strange silence to it, one that felt different from the usual quiet of nature. As I hiked further, the sounds of the forest faded, until there was only the rhythmic sound of my own breathing. I felt like I was being watched, but brushed the feeling aside. Eventually I found the cave. It was small, almost like it had been hidden by the forest itself. I stepped inside, letting my flashlight illuminate the uneven rock walls. The air was cold, and the silence inside was deafening. I decided to explore a little further, but that was when I heard the first noise, a faint scraping sound from deeper within. I stopped and listened. The sound stopped too. I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then it came again, louder this time, like something moving. I turned to leave, but something made me pause. I felt like I had to know what was in there, even though every instinct was telling me to get out. I walked deeper, the flashlight shaking in my hand. The scraping turned into shuffling footsteps, and I knew someone, or something, was in there with me. I couldn't see anything, but the sense of being followed was overwhelming. My heart pounded as I spun around and bolted out of the cave, not stopping until I reached the trail and could see the daylight again. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying what had happened, convincing myself that it was just an animal or a trick of the echoes. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even when I was back at home. I couldn't let it go, so the next day I decided to go back. I needed to prove to myself that I hadn't imagined it. I found the cave again, the entrance just as I had left it. This time I was prepared. I brought a more powerful flashlight, a spare, and even a whistle to scare off anything that might be lurking. As I stepped inside, I felt the same chill that had made me turn and run the first time. But I pressed on, determined to find out what had scared me so badly. As I moved deeper, I heard the sound again, the scraping, the shuffling, and then a voice. It was faint, like someone speaking in a whisper from a distance, saying, "You shouldn't have come back." I froze, looking around, but there was no one there. The silence pressed down on me, thick and heavy. I wanted to leave, but something kept me there, as if I were trapped. The voice came again, this time clearer, right behind me. "You shouldn't have come back." I spun around, heart racing, and caught a glimpse of a shadow moving just beyond the reach of my flashlight. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I needed to get out. The sound of footsteps echoed behind me, but whenever I turned to look, there was nothing. I burst out of the cave and stumbled into the daylight. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, not looking back even once. When I finally made it home, I realized that I had taken a few things with me. The voice, the shuffling, the feeling of being watched. I've never been back to that cave, and I never will. I don't know who or what was in there, but whatever it was, it made sure I knew that some places are meant to stay hidden, and some things are better left alone. It was a late summer afternoon when I decided to take a hike in the mountains alone. I wasn't expecting anything extraordinary, just a chance to clear my head and enjoy the quiet. I followed a trail that I'd never been on before, one that wasn't well marked, but seemed popular with locals. The further I went, the more the forest around me grew dense and silent. I felt uneasy, but I pushed that feeling away. Eventually, I came across an overgrown path that seemed to lead to the side of a mountain. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to follow it. It led to the entrance of a cave, barely visible through the thick brush. It was not on any map, and there were no signs warning against entry. I stood there for a moment, unsure whether I should go in, but then I heard something, faint whispers coming from inside. I couldn't make out the words, but it sent a chill down my spine. I hesitated, but something compelled me to enter. The air grew colder, and the whispers became clearer. I walked further in, my fast light casting long, wavering shadows. I kept moving, the whispers now a murmur that sounded like a conversation in a language I didn't recognize. I felt a sudden pang of fear, like I was intruding on something I wasn't supposed to see. The air grew heavier, and I could hear footsteps, quick and light, as if someone or something was moving just out of my sight. My heart raced, and I turned to leave, but the path behind me was gone. It was as if the cave had shifted, trapping me inside. A voice, deep and hollow, whispered, "You shouldn't be here." I panicked and ran, but the cave seemed to twist around me, the walls narrowing and closing in. I felt a cold hand brush against my arm, and I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the darkness. I stumbled, nearly falling, as the whispers rose into a cacophony that made my ears ache. I managed to find my way back to what I thought was the entrance, but when I stepped out, I wasn't in the forest. I was standing on a narrow ledge overlooking a deep, black void. The same voice called out again, louder now, "You shouldn't be here." I couldn't see anything, but the sound was coming from right behind me. I turned and saw the figure, tall, shadowy, with eyes that seemed to pierce through me. My mind went blank with terror, and I jumped, not caring where I landed. I fell, not for long, as I found myself on the forest floor, gasping for air. The cave was gone. There was no sign of its entrance, no path leading to it. The forest was as it had been before, untouched and still. I couldn't make sense of what had just happened. I got up and ran as fast as I could, not stopping until I reached my car and drove away. I never went back to that spot, and I never told anyone what happened. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear that voice again, whispering, "You shouldn't be here." And I know that whatever I saw, it never really left me,